There are stretches of adult life in which we function with outward ease, yet feel faintly misaligned with ourselves. We manage our obligations competently, respond kindly, and move through our roles without obvious difficulty, save for a subtle sense of inauthenticity beneath the surface. Not that we are unhappy or unwell, but that we feel curiously distanced from who we imagine ourselves to be. This quiet dislocation is the territory the British psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott spent much of his life trying to understand. Winnicott noticed that many capable adults seemed slightly absent from their own emotional lives. They were not distressed or conflicted, but living beside themselves, as though an unseen layer of adjustment stood between inner impulse and outward behavior. He believed this distance rarely begins in adulthood. It forms much earlier, in moments so ordinary they leave no memory. As children, we learn the emotional limits of the environments we depend on, which expressions soothe, which provoke withdrawal, which impulses feel welcome, and which feel excessive. This adjustment is not deliberate, it is relational, a quiet effort to preserve connection. Over time, this sensitivity can crystallize into what Winnicott called the compliant false self. Not a lie, and not a performance in the recreation sense, but a structure organized around maintaining harmony. The false self is reliable. It anticipates needs, absorbs responsibility, and smooths friction before it becomes visible. Its purpose is not manipulation, but stability. It develops not because authenticity is undesirable, but because it once felt disruptive in environments that could not easily accommodate it. As the compliant self becomes more refined, another part of the personality begins to withdraw. Winnicott described this quieter region as the true self, the source of spontaneous response, preference, and imaginative life. When adaptation becomes continuous, this inner space narrows. Life remains functional, even successful, but increasingly shaped by accommodation rather than expression. The result is not emptiness, but a muted sense of vitality. Winnicott referred to this as the experience of the unlived life, the recognition that one's existence has been organized more around what is manageable than around what feels internally real. Central to this loss is the erosion of spontaneity. For Winnicott, spontaneity was not impulsiveness, but the capacity to respond without excessive self-editing. It depends on an expectation of emotional safety, the sense that our reactions, even when imperfect, will not threaten connection. When that expectation is absent, spontaneity gives way to composure. Expression is replaced by reliability. Over time, this pattern is mistaken for maturity, while internally, it feels like a quiet depletion of aliveness. Winnicott did not argue for dramatic self-reinvention. Instead, he emphasized the importance of what he called a good enough environment, not one that is perfectly validating, but one in which minor disruptions are survivable. In adult life, this rarely requires dismantling who we are. It begins with smaller shifts, allowing a preference to surface without justification, noticing when we answer from habit rather than inclination, speaking in a slightly less curated register with someone we trust. These moments reopen the inner space that once narrowed. They allow the psyche to test whether authenticity still carries the same cost it once did. The false self does not dissolve quickly, nor should it. It was assembled in response to real conditions, and it often remains long after those conditions have passed. With adulthood, however, the central question shifts. It is no longer what will be acceptable, but whether the version of ourselves we have refined so carefully bears any real relation to who we are. Questions of identity rarely resolve neatly, but directing even a portion of our attention toward noticing what we suppress rather than what we present can begin to narrow the distance between adaptation and self.